Morning, people. Are you stupid? Because I don't think so. I've been wanting to do a video on stupidity in politics for a while now, but the reaction to last night's video that I did, specifically the people arguing, well, Germany's doing worse than we are, so Brexit must be helping us. Yeah, we need to talk about stupidity in politics. Because if we take that example, you're arguing that because Germany is doing worse than us in terms of economic growth, even though we've been doing worse than Germany in terms of inflation for a while now, and that's the actual cost of living, that means Brexit is helping us. But why? Literally, where is the logic there? You have to be arguing in some way that Germany being part of the EU is the reason why it's doing worse than us. But none of the people arguing this are doing that. None of them are explaining how. They aren't even suggesting anything. How does Germany having free access to trade with all of its neighbors put them at a disadvantage compared to us? Because if you aren't putting forward at least some kind of logic to explain your argument, then it's no different than saying, well, my decision to stop breathing oxygen was clearly the right one because that guy breathes oxygen and he just got cancer. You what? And that should be pretty obvious, because if you're arguing that Brexit is clearly a good thing because Germany is doing worse than us, without saying how being in the EU is hurting Germany or how being out of the EU is helping us, then you look stupid. Especially when even the people behind Brexit can't come up with ways that Brexit has somehow helped us.
Is we haven't actually benefited from Brexit economically.
But as I said, I don't think these people are actually stupid. It's a decision not to use their intelligence. Stupidity in politics is an ideology, not a mental condition. And don't get me wrong, I'm sure there are low intelligence people operating in politics, but I think we can all agree that attacking or criticizing people for their actual mental development issues would be fucked up. Oh, but for the record, the politicians and journalists who still support Brexit despite the clear evidence that it has ruined every sector of our economy, they're not stupid, they're just evil. And I'm also not talking about your average Leave voter who voted Brexit out of desperation as a pushback against austerity and regional inequality. You guys are good. Because I've wanted to do a video on stupidity ever since I saw Hank Green talking about the AI photo of the Pope looking like a rap star, which many people, including this guy, fell for.
It's not about if you can use your forensic detective skills to figure out what's going on in an image. It's about whether or not you take the time to check. There's some really obvious reasons why that would be. One, they don't care very much. Like, it's not a big deal. And second, and this is so important, this image doesn't shift my perspective on the world at all, so I don't have a reason to call it into question. But it can also be because it's confirming a previous bias I have, which is why it is the most important time to check when you are least likely to check. When there's BS out there, it could be an image, a headline, or whatever, every person, not people who are dumb, not people who don't take the time to check, every person is less likely to check, less likely to have their BS flagged if it's something that confirms their previous worldview.
Now, I fell for that photo because I just didn't care enough to check. But if I see a news story that backs up my worldview, maybe it's anti-Brexit, maybe it's anti-Tory, and it's on Twitter from somebody that I like, that's when I'll do the most research to make sure that it's actually true, because I don't want to be wrong. That is important to me, because I know that I'm more vulnerable to misinformation that I want to hear, and so I choose to engage my intelligence to defend myself from that vulnerability. Yet I've been in arguments with people on the right, and I've explained the facts, given them the reality, and they've said, yeah, but the Telegraph says the opposite. Yeah, because it's the Telegraph. A newspaper whose business model is based on appealing to people on the right said something that appealed to people on the right? Shocking. And because people end up believing more and more garbage that right-wingers love to hear, they get radicalized into nationalism like this.
You are arguing that one country is needed by 27 countries more than 27 countries are needed by one country.
Absolutely. Absolutely right.
That would imply that that one country is inherently better than 27 countries combined.
Bang on. Congratulations, you've hit the nail on the head. We are the fifth largest economy in the world.
Yep.
And what, so you think we are, and what, so you think
Do you see how easy and simple it was to expose the ridiculousness of the narrative that we heard back in 2016, that the EU needs us more than we need them, therefore we dominate the negotiations and get whatever Brexit deal Boris Johnson promised? Which, let's be clear, has been proven to be bullshit, because within 6 months of signing that deal, Boris Johnson himself was calling it unfair. No, I'm not saying that Brexit is simple. It's almost infinitely complex, but the basics are easy to understand if you choose to think about the right things. Because there was this narrative at the time that Remainers all thought we were really intelligent and that Brexiteers were stupid. But Remainers aren't all experts in EU law. There aren't 16 million experts in EU law in the UK, period. Most Remainers simply trusted the experts, because when I was going around the country talking to Brexiteers and Remainers, I had to explain to both of them what the single market was. And if you don't know what the single market is, you simply aren't qualified to answer a question about Brexit. And it's not even the fault of the people, because I had to correct the BBC's definition of the single market in 2018 because they were telling people that it was just a free trade deal. They published their definition of the single market in March 2018, and it wasn't until October that year when I shouted at Laura Kuenssberg to change it, they changed it 2 days later. And again, this stuff is simple if you choose to think, because imagine if the EU didn't exist and you had 28 different countries all making their own laws on everything. If you were a business who wanted to sell your product in every single country, you'd have to make it comply with 28 different sets of rules, potentially making 28 different versions of the same thing, which would send your costs through the roof and your profits into the toilet. So by EU countries making rules together, anything that's legal in one country is automatically legal to sell in any other country, so you can lower your prices. Whereas being outside of that system means that your stuff needs to be checked as it crosses the border, which adds cost. Now I just explained the single market to you in 20 seconds. Across the last 7 years since the referendum, how many times have you heard a news presenter explain it like that? But it is simple if people choose to think about it. Stupidity in politics is an ideology, not a mental condition. And that was the crux of the whole Brexit debate, because on one side you had take back control of our laws, on the other side you had but it will make us poorer, with almost nobody on TV explaining how taking back control of our laws and having different laws to the EU makes us poorer. Made even worse by the BBC telling people that we could get all the benefits of the single market by just having a simple free trade deal without having to share our laws. And it was made worse by the fact that we were actually discouraged from believing that there might be stuff that we don't know by politicians and journalists. The question itself implied that we were all qualified enough to answer a question about Brexit. And by making it a binary question between remain, which meant our relationship with the EU as it stood as members of the EU, versus leave, which could be literally any other relationship, it implied that the topic of international relations was a binary issue that we all had enough information to understand. I hope when I say it like that, you can all see how fucking insane that is. And that gave birth to the idea that Brexit, leaving the European Union, those 4 words on the ballot paper, could mean whatever you wanted it to, which our journalists then confirmed for us.
So, as I just explained, that deal takes us out of the EU. It fulfills the referendum mandate.
A lot of people don't think that it does. That's why it needs Parliament.
Sorry, the customs union is not the European Union. Let's be clear on that.
You think that it takes us out of the EU, but the majority of people who want to leave don't agree with you. That's the maths.
If it does it, is it a good deal? No, I'd agree it's a bad deal. But does it take us out of the EU? 100%.
Well, a lot of people say it's not 100%. You're just saying it doesn't make it so.
No. Law says it makes it so. As in, I literally studied EU law. We'd be out of the European Union.
Go and tell that to somebody who wants to leave.
It is literally an exit deal.
But not necessarily out in the way that people thought they were voting.
No,
exactly.
Yes, I know. But it's because it wasn't defined in 2016 that we're in this mess.
And the thing is, if people actually decided to use their brains back then, they would have thought, how is it that Theresa May's deal would mean we're actually technically out of the EU, but wouldn't achieve any of the things that I wanted when I voted to leave the EU? How is it that all these Brexiteers are coming up with these different versions of Brexit, like soft Brexit, hard Brexit, Malthouse Compromise A, Malthouse Compromise B, no deal, and the Brexiteers are disagreeing amongst themselves as to what Brexit they want, so it's not possible to please them all, yet supposedly the 52% all voted for the same thing. But at that point, they'd all been radicalized into this idea that Brexit was the will of the people, so they chose not to question it. Again, stupidity in politics is an ideology, not a mental condition. The Brexit politicians and journalists weaponize this idea, but saying that Leave voters didn't know what they were voting for is the same as calling them stupid. Even though, as I just explained, Remain was a fully defined relationship between the UK and the EU defined by 2 separate treaties, and Leave was literally any other relationship because the Brexiteers have spent the last 7 years arguing about what it should be. So it was like the politicians deliberately forced the Dunning-Kruger effect onto their own population, which is the phenomenon where you're too stupid to know that you're stupid. Or in this case, the mistaken belief that you know all you could possibly need to know. The Chinese philosopher Confucius once said, real knowledge is to know the extent of one's own ignorance. And I'm really blunt about that. I'm not special. I just happen to study EU law, which put me at the center of Brexit. If we'd had a referendum on something to do with medicine or physics, I'd have been just as clueless as everybody else, so I'd have had to listen to the experts as well. The problem is, a lot of politicians have this idea that they have to know everything about everything and have a fully formed opinion on every topic, and they can't be wrong so they can't change their minds afterwards. Acknowledging what you don't know, acknowledging your own ignorance is the best way to avoid being catastrophically wrong. Instead, our politicians told us that the British people know all they need to know and said things like this.
I think the people in this country have had enough of experts with organisations from acronyms.
The people of this country have had enough of experts.
From organisations with acronyms saying that they know what is best and getting it consistently wrong.
I mean, in 2019, before the election, before any of us had even heard of coronavirus, I said, access to expertise, e.g. medical, is a major factor in survival rates across the globe. Respect for expertise and a willingness to follow its advice is therefore part of human evolution. I was saying that the ideology of stupidity, of the rejection of expertise, would get people killed. Fast forward a couple of months to January 2020.
The Royal College of Nurses, the Royal College of GPs, the Royal College of Radiologists, the Royal College of Midwives, and the British Medical Association, which represents over 140,000 doctors across the UK, say that Brexit will be bad for the NHS. So excuse me if I buy your idea that it's 50-50. Brexit is objectively a bad thing for our National Health Service.
What do you say to that?
No, that's an opinion. And
okay,
at the end of the day, Femi, there's one way to find out, isn't there? Let's try it. Let's try it.
Mark, next time you go to the GP and he gives you a diagnosis, please say, that's your opinion.
And now it's official that Brexit has been damaging our NHS by compromising our supply of medical materials and staff. And during the pandemic, our main vulnerability was a lack of NHS staff. So people will have died from this. And Boris Johnson even admitted that his reluctance to impose the rules that were needed to save lives was because of his anti-expert ideology.
That is, our country is a freedom-loving country, Mr. Speaker. And it is very difficult to ask the British population uniformly to obey guidelines in the way that it is necessary.
He just spent the previous 4 years telling people to follow freedom, sovereignty, and ignore experts, and now he had to do the exact opposite. And his health secretary admitted that, and admitted that they were wrong.
The concern was if we locked down too soon, there wouldn't be a willingness to lock down for a long period of time. Now, we actually know now that actually there was a willingness of the British public to lock down for far longer.
And that failure to lock down on time at the start of the pandemic, when Boris Johnson was telling people to shake hands with COVID patients, the Parliament's inquiry found that was one of the worst public health failures in UK history, with estimates that it cost between 20 and 30,000 lives. The ideology of stupidity gets people killed. And that anti-expert ideology informs how the right wing in politics deals with the fact that academia tends to be left-wing, calling them woke universities. Which I find hilarious because woke literally means an awareness of the suffering and injustice in the world and a desire to change it. So it's not surprising that the place people go to learn about the world is woke. So anybody with a shred of decency who learns about the world, learns about the suffering in the world, the problems in the world, sees that we have enough to go around but that it doesn't go around, will automatically become somebody who strives for social justice, a social justice warrior if you like. So knowledge naturally skews people to the left and ignorance skews people to the right. So it's not surprising that this government has such a hostile attitude towards universities. Remember when Tory MP Chris Heaton-Harris demanded a list of names of all the professors who were teaching about Brexit? And then the government published plans for a free speech champion in universities, and one of the reasons they gave was that 4 out of 10 Leave voters felt uncomfortable outing themselves as Leave voters in lectures. Now, if I supported something that my government's own experts were saying had done more long-term damage to our economy than COVID, I'd probably keep quiet about that in academic circles as well. But for this government, knowledge and intelligence is their enemy. It's the ideology that celebrates ignorance that keeps them in power. So if I call a Brexiteer stupid, I'm not attacking their intellect, I'm attacking their decision not to use it. I'm Femi. Have a great week.